Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about something that's particularly important, regardless of whether you're a young athlete at risk or someone in the general population. We're going to talk about concussions. I always like to start with what a concussion is, because for a long time, we've been very famous for not taking them seriously. And that's not just the medical field, that's throughout the world in general. Because what we're recognizing concussion is at this point is a type of traumatic brain injury. That means that we are receiving physical trauma to the brain itself, and we need to make sure that we're taking good care to allow it full recovery. You may have seen recent studies showing up on BBC and different news agencies showing that even the risk of one concussion can increase the risk of further complications later in life. So we need to make sure that we are taking steps appropriately, so if we do have a concussion, we make sure that we don't have risk for further in the future. Now, what we've seen in the past is that people who have had concussions and don't take enough time to make sure that they're back to 100% have a higher risk than people who don't take that time. So that's going to be one of the things we're talking about today. Concussion prevention in general is very difficult because it requires a whole bunch of factors, and we can't rule out one of the biggest issues, and that is human error. Most often when concussion happens, it's accidents. Somebody moved unexpected ways and resulted in a collision. Car accidents, different issues that come up in life that we just couldn't prevent. For many adults, falls risk is a big issue, and we want to make sure that we're talking about that in later videos. But one of the biggest things we can do now is make sure that if something has happened and one of these accidents has occurred, we have a good set of knowledge for how to recognize it, what should be done in these cases, and what to do if we have diagnosed that. So there's a nice simple thing that we try to do once somebody has had any sort of head injury. If we tend to see somebody who has a headache that comes on very suddenly over about a 24 to 48 hour period afterwards, and it just keeps getting worse, that's a key sign that something might be going on. If they're having confusion issues, recognizing people, are having weakness or discoordination, if their speech isn't quite right, especially in young athletes, all of these things are a sign that something's really off, because these should be people who have a lot of energy, who should have a very easy time with most things. It's not normal for them to have that kind of issue, especially for it to not go away over a very, very quick period. Another really key thing that we tend to see with these people is part of the old myth that if they fall asleep, you can't wake them up. What that tends to be a sign of is not necessarily that we shouldn't let people who we suspect of concussion go to sleep. It's one of the signs that a concussion has happened. It's not necessarily a bad thing to let someone go to sleep once they have a concussion, because the first thing I'm going to tell you about later is that we need rest. However, if you do notice that somebody who has had a recent head injury is having a hard time waking up, we really want to make sure that they've been checked for a good concussion screen and make sure that nothing's going on. Now, these are of course just things that we can do on the side of the field or a little bit after to watch out if somebody's had a fall or an impact that might have resulted in a head injury. We don't always see the bruising that we expect if someone's had a fall and bruises on the face. Sometimes it's a relatively light bump because it's just how the brain happened to move at the time. So keep an eye out for things like that, regardless of if someone's in a high impact sport or just had a very, very light bump on the head. Anything abnormal that you tend to see as a picture could be part of that list, and if that list is throwing some red flags at you, it's better to check than to really not know what's going on. Now, once we have figured out that concussion is happening, we want to go through a very specific rehab protocol, and the first part of that protocol is rest. Now, the amount of time that a person needs to rest does vary, and your neurologist is going to be the best tool to help you figure out what time is normal to get back. And everybody's going to have a little bit different recovery period, regardless of their age, the severity of the injury. Even people who should be the same don't seem to recover the same, and that is okay. Everybody's going to have a unique way of their brain developing, and that's just fine. It's important, though, to respect it. So during that early period, your brain requires a lot of energy to heal. Neurons don't heal quite like the rest of the parts of our body. So what I want you guys to make sure is that people aren't thinking too hard, and that they're not doing too much. We call this a period of not just physical, but cognitive rest. So a lot of people have been encouraged more often now to take a little bit of time off of work or school. Even though that's highly inconvenient, it's very important to let the brain recover all the way. Once we get past that phase, the neurologist has cleared you, then we start doing some light exercise that increases your heart rate. Because when we increase our heart rate for exercise, our blood is diverted more to our musculature. it can tax our brain a little bit in terms of how much energy it can use. So what we want to do during this phase is slowly get the brain used to the blood supply that is normal during physical activity, whether it's just walking around our house or starting to participate in running or jogging. We stay very light during this period, and as symptoms start to onset, and they may over this short period of time, we wean it back off, we let people rest. But our goal is to start increasing the amount of time that you can spend being active over the next short period. Then, once we get that to a more normal level, that's when we usually start doing some more advanced exercise, whether it's returning to more of your daily exercise routine, or for athletes, returning to more exercises that kind of mimic what you're doing in sport without having any risk of contact or further re-injury. Once we're through that phase for more of our athletic population, that's when we go back to our non-contact training drills and eventually progress to a full training. Over this period, you want to be working very closely with your neurologist to make sure that we know what's going on. One of the things that you can do if you do have a young athlete who's in risk for any of these categories is to look for something called a SCAT3, S-C-A-T-3. I'm actually going to link it in the description below. This is a test that's been put together both by the Olympic Committee and FIFA and is used by both of them in order to help make sure that we're diagnosing these things correctly. Now, this is not a test that's meant to be administered necessarily by a coach or by a parent even. This is just something that is a tool that should be readily available, and you should have someone on the sideline who's qualified to give it. If you're finding that your sport does not have these things and there's no system in place to baseline them beforehand or to test them if something has happened, it's very important that we do start doing that type of thing for your youth athlete sport. And if it's something you're interested in, you can start by talking to your coach and say, hey, here's something I'd like to make sure is going on, just protection of our athletes. And more often than not, they're very accommodating if you're coming with them because it's kind of a hard thing to know about. But this way, now we have a little bit of a protocol that you guys can follow. If you have any other questions about concussion, because there is quite a bit to it, please let us know. And we're going to be happy to put together future things about it. But because it is such a broad category, I want to know, what do people want to know? Have a great day, guys.